To finish up the chapter material, I want to talk about natural experiments, field experiments, and then the strengths and weaknesses of the experimental method. And then I want to back up and talk specifically about the Hawthorne effect. So sometimes nature designs and executes experiments that we can observe and analyze. Sometimes social and political decision makers can serve this function. For example, a number of studies were done following the September 11th attacks on how communities come together and deal with disasters, how politicians and citizens respond to crises, how the media covers events, and so on. Natural experiments raise a lot of the same validity problems that we discussed earlier. You can't randomly assign control in experimental groups in order to ensure comparability of samples. In some ways, these natural experiments are sometimes better because they don't suffer from the artificiality of laboratory experiments, but they have the weakness of you not being able to include the same level of control of extraneous variables. So overall, if we look at the strengths and weaknesses of the experimental method, some of the strengths, it has high causal validity. It has high internal validity. So we can control things, so we can measure what we think we're measuring, and it's true to the measurement itself. So it has high measurement validity. One of the other strengths is that you can isolate the experimental variable and its impact over time because you're controlling for everything else within the experiment. Then you can really determine what factors influence or having an influence on the dependent variable. It can be replicated fairly easily. You reset the lab, you run the experiment again, and it allows you to control the situation and the surroundings to a greater extent. We don't often get that kind of control. Some of the weaknesses, it's artificial. We don't behave the way when we know we're being watched. We don't behave the same in a lab as we would in a natural setting. It has low generalizability because of the additional controls and because of the artificiality. We really can't say that what we find within this controlled environment is true for the larger population or other circumstances. It can be relatively expensive in terms of times and resources. Setting up, having the physical space to set a lab up, having the staff to run a lab, being able to execute the lab. As we talked about, sometimes you compensate participants. All of these things can make it time consuming and expensive to run experiments. And again, the social processes of a lab setting are unnatural. We've seen enough cop shows to know what one-way glass looks like. And so if we're in a lab setting, we know we're being observed, it's going to have an effect on how we respond to the stimuli. I want to back up a little bit. I talked a couple of times, mentioned the Hawthorne effect, but I want to spend a little time talking about the Hawthorne effect and how that can be an important factor when we are dealing with experimentation. And I'm not sure if you've heard about the definition of, there's a video that I'm including for you this week to explain what the Hawthorne effect is and why it's important. The Hawthorne effect is the idea that being observed is often enough to change our behavior without any other stimulus. And it's based on research conducted in the 1930s in Hawthorne, Illinois, at the Western Electric Works. The researchers there were interested in learning if working conditions affected productivity. So the researchers ran an experiment where they improved working conditions in the telephone bank wiring room and discovered that worker satisfaction and productivity increased. So what they did, they increased the lighting. So better lighting increased productivity. So like, wow, okay, so we increased the lighting and we had more productive workers. Let's increase the lighting again and see what happens. Well, they increased the lighting again and productivity increased again. To validate or sort of substantiate their research, they decided to dim the lights, expecting that if the level of lighting was connected to productivity, that dimming the lights would reduce productivity. But what they found was productivity increased again. So they increased the lighting, it improved productivity. They increased the lighting again, it improved productivity. They dimmed the lighting and it increased productivity. So what's going on? Clearly lighting isn't the issue. So it became obvious that the workers were responding to the attention being given them by the researchers rather than the changes in the working conditions. So this is the Hawthorne effect, and why we have to be very careful about when we are running experiments, that that the experiment itself doesn't become a factor that the um, inhibits the value of the study. So individuals' behaviors can be altered because they know they're being studied, and that was demonstrated here. Lighting always worked, but only for a short period. The major finding of the study was that regardless of the experimental manipulation employed, the production of the workers seemed to improve. So they were pleased to receive the attention from the researchers who expressed an interest in that. And the study was only expected to last 1 year, but because the researchers were set back each time uh, they tried to manipulate the physical conditions to the workers' efficiency, the project extended out to 5 years because they were trying to figure out what factors actually worked. And apparently, the factor that worked the best was being watched and being given the attention of the researchers.